We're continuing on this New Zealand adventure with some Hobbit-themed content. Of course, I couldn't go to New Zealand and not visit the iconic locations that were used for The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings films, but also there's Hobbiton. So a couple years back, I went to New Zealand and I am still in the process of sharing the various content that I created during that season trip leading up to the trip as I sewed many different costumes. So far, I've only shared about the Narnia side of things, making the replicas of several of Susan's looks. We're finally onto The Hobbit, but I'm not doing a replica. This look is gonna be just inspired by Hobbit and Bilbo Baggins and Frodo Baggins and just overall a Hobbit-y look. So watch along as I create my favorite piece of this whole look, the Red Velveteen Coat that just turned out perfect, but also here's some inspiration for the look overall.
I don't have a concrete vision. I feel like I'm in between two looks. One is a Hobbit Girl look, which you see in the movies. And then my other look that I'm going between is wanting to create a feminine version of Frodo and Bilbo Baggins. And so that one would have more of a masculine look to a Hobbit Girl look. And so my brain is like, I see a vest that I'm like, oh, that's cute, and I like that style, but then I'm like, well, that is more like a Hobbit Girl vest look and not just like a men's wear vest. My brain is like going in two different, I don't know which to do or which to be inspired by. I think I'm gonna lean towards just doing a feminine version of Bilbo Baggins. That's how I got all my supplies. I'm trying to just have fun with it while still staying true to my vision, even though my vision is very blurred right now. At least kind of. So let's get started.
After creating the pattern, it's on to cutting the interlining of this coat, which will be a thin wool. I felt like the velveteen needed a little bit of added structure, plus I wanted it to be somewhat of a warm coat. Also, it happened to be some fabric I got for one of my Narnia looks, but it ended up being the wrong color and too lightweight. After that's cut, it's on to the velveteen. And with any type of velvet, nap is super important. So all the pieces need to be cut using the same direction, and with the flowy aspect of this coat, it took some maneuvering to be economical with the fabric, but also make sure the grain line and direction were taken into account. The wool and velveteen pieces are now layered together and basted. With the pieces that are rolled back to create the lapels, it is positioned that way during basting to allow for that extra ease needed to achieve that fold. In general, any basting should be done in somewhat of the position and shape that the final piece will have. This is where a seam roll and pressing ham are super helpful. Once the basting is complete, I chalked the sewing lines on all the pieces and can now start assembling using those chalked lines as I pin them together. And it's thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. It is so easy to get caught up in work, to-dos, and the ever-present phone. To disconnect for a while and get creative with something that isn't work, Skillshare has thousands of classes to widen your horizons and get you back to reality. I chose to take this art class about using brush markers, something I invested in years ago and have still yet to really learn how to use them. Taking the time to do something for myself that isn't work and just let the ink flow is so beneficial. These classes really can be just the sources to help widen my creativity and artsy side without having to get it perfect. The class was so well taught, and I loved pulling out a blank sheet and just seeing what I could learn with no pressure for the outcome. Skillshare is the best place to learn a creative skill or pick up a new hobby. So if you're looking to reconnect with your creativity and maybe avoid some brain rot, Skillshare is where humans come to learn from other humans. The first 500 people to click the link in my description or scan the QR code will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Find some ways where you can disconnect a little bit and reconnect to yourself. From here, any curved lines are clipped to allow them to lay flat and smooth. At first, I hoped to serge these edges to finish them, but after doing some, I really didn't like the look, and more on that in just a second. When ironing velvet or velveteen, it's important to not crush the plush. So first, a layer of velveteen is laid down. This is a piece I have dedicated to this purpose, and it just happens to match my project fabric. Anyway, the velvet coat is then laid on top, and this allows the plush of the lower velvet to sort of create a cushion, which keeps the coat velvet from crushing when the iron is used. The reverse of this is used when you want to iron from the right side. Okay, back to finishing those seam allowances. So next I tried to just use a cat stitch to get them to lay flat and hopefully contain the edges, but with how velvet frays, I didn't like that. I knew little red pieces would end up on what I wore under this coat. So I decided on completely binding the edges with some silk. I attached the folded edge to the seam allowances, and then the second edge was wrapped around to the back side, and that outer folded edge was then hand sewn to the interlining. This not only contains the raw edges, but also gets the seams tacked open. Now for the collar. The two pieces are sewn together and the seam allowances clipped. From here, the collar is attached to the coat body. And I first pinned the wrong side of the collar to the coat. With collars and their folded back nature, everything's a reverse. So the under part of the collar is attached to the right side of the coat. And of course, a try-on at this stage, and really any stage, is always a good idea. Time to attach the facing. This pre-assembled piece going from the bottom front edge all the way up the front around the neckline and back down the other front edge, and in turn is also creating the right sides of the lapels. At the collar, the facing was just attached to the right side of this double-sided collar. Any curved areas are clipped and trimmed, and the facing can be turned about. First, focusing on the collar. There's a lot going on here. The back of the collar is attached to the coat, and the facing is attached to the top of the collar. Now all these seams are being arranged smoothly around the neck, and the collar is rolled to make sure this ease is worked into this as all that is accomplished. For the lapels, the seams are clipped and trimmed, and in turn we get front-facing velvet. The loose edge of the facing is then pinned in place, and again this is all done with the lapels folded back as they will be. Before sewing down that second facing edge, I double checked all the rolls of this collar and lapels on my dress form. And now that pinned facing edge is sewn down. To minimize the bulk of turning in the facing edge, I had attached a strip of bias cut silk to that raw edge, and now the velvet can lay flat as it's sewn in place. At the collar neckline, some large stitches are done on top of the seams, going pretty much all the way through all the seams to keep everything in place. And finally, this collar and lapel area is almost finished. I did some preliminary steaming of the rolled edges. I'm not touching the iron to the velvet at all, it's just getting it steamy and hot, and then I'm using my hands as a press. Now onto the dress form it goes, and more steam to continue the shaping. Going on to the sleeves, I decided on a flared sort of cuff design. These lower sections are first pre-prepared. The cuff edges are finished with a facing. Once that facing is pressed, it's hand sewn down using a stitch that barely picks up any of the cuff fabric. I didn't add any interlining to the sleeves and cuffs, so I don't want any of my stitches to show through to the right side of the velvet. The cuffs are now set aside and the sleeves are attached to the coat. After I checked the sleeve lengths, I then attached the cuffs. This seam and the armhole seams are serged. Now onto the back folds of the coat skirt. This just took some clipping and folding in of those edges to arrange them on top of each other, creating an overlap. These edges are hand sewn in place, making sure to catch the folded edge of that outer overlap, and then focusing on the inner folded edge. On the bottom edge, I cut pieces of wool matching the curved shape. This is basically a hem facing. I would have done this in velvet, but I ran out of fabric. In the end though, it worked out fine since I was able to roll the edge of the coat up enough and get a bit of the velvet on the inside, so to speak. This will ensure that the wool facing doesn't show through to the front. And it pains me to say this, but then I went on to machine sewn buttonholes. I really wanted to do them hand sewn, but my schedule was incredibly tight, and I know I can make a good machine sewn buttonholes and save so much time. The final steps of this velveteen coat is attaching some gold buttons. And note, these back two will actually get repositioned a bit closer together to get a better slimming look at the back. This is a favorite piece of my Hobbit look, and I've actually worn it as a regular coat on Christmas Eve a couple years ago, and I've paired it with some other pieces to create a Little Woman-inspired look. It truly is a timeless classic coat.
okay, a little bit out of the blue, but having a red coat like this reminds me of this childhood favorite book that I read so many times and maybe was a little bit predictive of who I would become. It's basically about a mom who wants to buy her daughter a new coat, but she doesn't have the money. So the mom trades with various artisans to create the red coat. Anyway, my red coat reminds me of this book and how I loved reading it growing up. And now I have my own red coat.
And the rest of the outfit components will come in a later video as I share the process of creating those. So stay tuned for that and other sewing content. Also, there will be more vlogs and footage of actually in New Zealand coming soon. As always, a huge thank you to my patrons, YouTube members, and Instagram subscribers for their continued support. And now go out there and learn always, create often, and inspire others.